Hello, and welcome to another episode of My Two Cent. My name is Paul Emerson, and I'll be giving you my 2 cent. I just woke up. It's Christmas Eve. I'm still living in my car, doing my best to just continue to be a decent human being in a crazy world. Um, I've been meaning to make this video for a while. Um, since the beginning of when it came out, I want to just show you this person's video. And what I want to emphasize on is 245K in 5 days, right? You see the title, Neil Degrasse Tyson and the trans athlete issue and why the anger. I haven't watched her video yet. And the reason why I haven't watched her video yet is because I've wanted to address the Neil deGrasse Tyson issue for a while. But before I do that, I've also had another thing that I've been wanting to do for a while. And last night I guess this morning, I had a dream about, I don't really know. It's weird. Dreams are weird, right? They don't really follow reality like normal. But basically, I had a dream that I was speaking with Bill Nye the Science Guy. Not as like a kid or nothing, but like right now in the present. Like the men that we are right now, we're having a discussion. And halfway through the dream, I was like, oh, I almost forgot I had to tell you something. And then his energy changed because he was kind of like being like Bill, like the Bill that you see on TV or the Bill that we as public figures know, with all that extra energy and off over the topness and his whole energy just changed when I said that. And he went from being Bill Nye the Science Guy, hi, to probably the man that he actually is, because I don't know him personally. And then he tried to transition back into Bill Nye the Science Guy, but my statement of, oh, I forgot I have to tell you something, never changed. His energy never fully transitioned back to who he was. And what I've always wanted to tell Bill Nye the Science Guy, and what I would tell him if I ever met him in person before he passes, is that he was absolutely correct. As a scientist, when you have an observation and you have an experiment and you want to, actually engage in some type of scientific endeavor. The world has changed significantly from when I was a child. And I mean like a child, from when I was a 6 or 7 year old boy running around in the projects before I moved to the state of Oregon with my father. The world has changed significantly. We're talking about, I was born before the internet. I was born before I remember rotary phones. I remember having to do the little thing and wait for it to go back, and do the little thing and wait for it to go back. I'm older than dial-up. Dial-up didn't exist when I was a child. So, and I mean that in the context of the public versus the government or the corporate level. At the public level, these things didn't exist. I'm old enough that I remember when the cable companies was laying cable networks in the ground. I remember the trucks coming into our communities, digging the ground up. And I remember asking somebody as a kid, like, what are they doing? And then the guy's like, yeah, they're laying this new cable. Like, you know how TV, there's a conversation me and him had. You know how the TV comes across like the air and stuff and you can change your channels? And there's like 6 or 7 channels. Yeah, this new cable stuff's gonna have like 1,000 channels. And it's just like, I just kind of like chuckled like I just did now, because it's like 1,000 channels. Like there's only like 8 channels. Like there's not even enough. It's kind of hard to put it into perspective, but it's like there's not enough shows on the regular TV to justify 1,000 channels. Like, how is that even gonna work? Like, like it was beyond the idea of what had existed. But yes, Bill Nye kind of went back into that state of trying to figure out, or kind of deflecting from it. And as I've alluded to, I believe personally, And I agree with his assessment that the biggest problem of the world was not my channel, my platform currently is racism and discrimination. The biggest problem in the world was not so much racism and discrimination. You're looking at it through the lens of a average age Caucasian. I don't know what his nationality is. I want to say it's American, but it might be Canadian. But looking at it through the lens of a man that grew up in a world that had these stigmas and these conflicts, that was being very pro science in a very non-scientific reality, living back then when it came to like religions, fanatics, what we would just consider a religious person, it was a very difficult environment, a very difficult reality to navigate. And I look back at the person that I was growing up watching Bill Nye, the Science Guy, and Bigman World on TV, and just having the foundation of science laid out to me at a young age, 6 and 7 years old. There is no internet, there is no CGI, there is no computer generation. There are grown men wearing bodysuits pretending to be giant lizards, right? Like the TVs that when we're watching television, the resolution is like less than 300 DPI. There is no way for a kid to look at a TV and think that's real. It's funny, but we know instinctively what's on that TV is not real. Then sometimes you watch stuff that has had a lot of extraordinary effort put into it, and you're like, that might actually be real. And that just drove our young imaginations at the time. So Bill's premise, from my opinion, was that if more people were science literate, the world overall would be a better place. That the biggest way that we can fix humanity as a whole is to get people to be more science literate. You don't have to not be religious. You don't have to not have a belief system. But if you have more fundamental understanding of empirical data and empirical science, you can make better informed decisions. You can make better choices. You can have a better problem solving capability, which will reduce your stress in your life on a day-to-day basis. And it's from that position that I believe, because I don't know him personally, that was why he started Bill Nye the Science Guy. The goal was to educate the masses and fix the world problems. And I'm telling you, Bill Nye the Science Guy, because I know you probably won't be able to see this video, that you were correct. You were absolutely correct in your position and your theory. Your thesis was sound. The conflict is that because we did not address the issue of racism, the more you educated the masses with empirical data, the more that stuff was spun to continue to control the agenda as set forward. It doesn't matter how much empirical data you have if you're still going to be able to be manipulated and controlled by your basic natures, by a mass society built on propaganda and exploitation, right? So it's like you were correct. If I understand that gravity is a force that pulls and attracts toward the earth, I can make better sound decisions. That's why there's videos of astronauts, which is really the most ironic thing in the world that no one even thinks about or talks about. There's videos of astronauts that will be doing normal day-to-day things and forget that gravity exists because they existed in an environment where there was no gravity, and it will let stuff go. It will fall to the ground, and they will be looking at like, where did that go? Where did I just had a pen? Where is my pen? Why isn't my pen where I left it? Because gravity exists now. They forget to take the extra second to say, I need to set my pen down. Let me go sit on the table, because they spent time in a zero gravity environment. So they don't make a very good informed decision, right? That's not, even children know that you can't just leave stuff in the air, you know. And it's a really cool spin for me personally, because I've always considered that to be the very first science experiment that most children undergo, especially modern children. When you see a child push something off of a table, a parent will come pick it up, instinctively just pick it up, put it back, and try to knock it off again, and the parent will pick it up, put it back, and they try to knock it off again. To me, that's like the very first scientific experiment that most children engage in, because they understand that there is a relationship between what they have, what they don't have access to, and for some reason, it falls toward the floor. Every time it's on the table, if it's not on the table, it has to be on the floor, right? So in that energy, I feel like that's the first scientific experiment. And to have adults go into space, right, and be exposed to zero gravity, and then they're in zero gravity and they're forgetting that gravity exists because gravity still exists. Like you're not out of gravity, it's just behaving differently now. And then I have them come back to Earth and be like, yeah, let me set this pin down and put it in midair, and then they let it go and it just falls. It speaks back to me to the earliest, what I consider the earliest experiment of babies dropping stuff on the floor, right? So this video literally is because in the video, in the dream I was having when I was trying to tell Neil that he was right. I mean, not Neil, Bill Nye, that he was right in that his belief that making people more science literate would improve the quality of life on Earth. I am the living example of that. All of the influences that negatively impact everybody in the world existed for me. The information, the little bit of information that Neil deGrasse, that Bill Nye, that's why you shouldn't mix your videos together. The little bit of information that Bill Nye gave me growing up as a child is the foundation on top of which I am able to navigate this world and be a productive member of society. My day is going great. My father helped a lot, but the adversities of living in a world built on discrimination and racial prejudice isn't enough. Having a grown man, regardless of his ethnicity, speak to a child at child's level to communicate information that was important and relevant in a way and in a context that that child could apply to his world is what shaped me into who I am. That's why I started my 2 cent, because I was always applying the principles of science to my reality from a young age. And everyone's like, if you're a scientist, where did you go to school? I didn't go to school. I sat in front of my TV and watched educational shows growing up. Most people, even to this day, sit in front of TVs and monitors and watch entertainment all their lives. If you sit in front of an actual computer screen or a TV screen or a radio and you listen to academic level information and you take that information and you apply it into your mind in a way that can be utilized later, you can draw from that information later and apply it, and you're using actual valid data, not just information that's continuously entertaining. Don't get me wrong, I watch Dragon Ball Z, I watch Naruto, I love Starscape and Star Trek. I watch entertainment on television, but I don't limit myself to just flat out entertainment. And having this well of information that is empirically set means that I can use it to do real life stuff. So, Bill Nye Science Guy, you were correct. No one's going to tell you that you were right, but you were correct. You definitely could help the African American community and reduce poverty by just teaching them basic science. And Black people are not stupid. They just have a lack of information because the educational system is failing in America. Every premise that you make, the fact that you didn't say all of this stuff, and I'm telling it to you, is how you know that you were right and all your peers were wrong. Right? Okay, that has been said. Now, let's get to Neil deGrasse Tyson, because I think these two are perfect segues into each other. Because me and Neil, I think Neil's a little bit older than me, but I think me and Neil had a similar upbringing in that regard. Whereas I grew up in a very low income to poor environment, he grew up in a very low income to middle class environment that allowed him to have a trajectory slightly different than my own. I don't think I ever would have done well in academics, even if I would have had the finances to pursue academics. I don't think that I would have ever done well in academics, because the educational system is not designed to teach, it's designed to control. It goes back to the whole point of why I mentioned Bill Nye the Science Guy. You're not in school for 18 years to be intelligent. If we were in school for 18 years to be intelligent, we would be more intelligent. There's no reason why the average intelligence of the average person in America, I don't know about the rest of the world, but in America is like 6th grade. They'll tell you it's higher, but it's not. It's basically middle school. America basically operates at the middle school age. We pretty much are like 16-year-olds running around. That's just the reality. And the gap between 16 and 18 is the equivalent of the gap between 18 and 25. That's the reason why my channel is specifically designed for 18, 25. That's the most important part of your life when you go from being a child, because you, like I've said 1,000 times before, you don't wake up, you don't go to bed at the age of 17 and wake up 18, in the 17 years of your life that you had lived stops being influential to you. We're not butterflies. There is no transition, there is no change. But by the time you start turning 18, your body has fully developed. Your brain spends the first 17 years of your life, and all this is relevant to the conversation we're going to have about transgender. Your brain spends the first 18 years of your life regulating your body and making sure your body reaches adulthood. Once your body reaches adulthood, your brain is like, okay, now that you're done growing, it's my turn to start to grow. So from 18 to 25, you transition from a child to an adult. Literally from a child to an adult. There are moments in children's when they're in school trying to learn something, and the teacher's like, "You're not trying hard enough. You're not trying hard enough. If you would just apply yourself, you'd be able to read this." Everybody's different. And there are moments in the development of the brain when you wake up with more neurons and you're like, oh, that's why that works. Oh, I understand that now. That's the reason why you get all this information. And at a certain, you're like, I don't understand. This doesn't make any sense. I don't understand. I don't get it. I'm trying really hard. Everybody's telling me that and it doesn't click. The reason why the reason why I didn't click on Tuesday, but I clicked on Thursday, is because from Tuesday to Thursday, 100,000 neurological paths were formed physically in your brain. Your brain changed on a biological level to be able to solve that problem. And I want you to really think about that for a second. If I tell you, if you give each, here's the best way to explain it. Because I was saying this to my daughter yesterday the day before yesterday when we were leaving Sonic, and I said, every human being has to learn how to walk, right? 100% of us have to learn how to walk. And for those of us that are healthy enough to learn to walk, 100% of us fall before we learn to walk. Nobody is born able to just walk because we don't have the physiological bodies for it. You're not strong enough to carry yourself. Your legs have to develop enough mass and become strong enough to carry your weight. Then you have to learn how to balance. You have to learn how you're going to balance. Everybody doesn't walk the same way. There's no correct way to walk. There's no correct way to hold yourself up, right? So in that, the learning process for walking, 100% of people fail at it, right? What I'm going to add for this video is, when you're learning to walk, your brain has to physically change. It has to physically create neurological pathways that coordinate and articulate your legs in such a way that your body is able to work in harmony with each other for you to be able to actually successfully walk, right? It's the same thing with education. It's the same thing. The more information you have, the more neural paths you create. The more neural paths you create, the more information you can get access to. But the most important part of all of that is your ability to problem solve, which is directly related to your social interaction, which is the reason why there is a social science. Everything about what we do is governed by the subjective nature of reality and our interaction with each other and with ourselves. We have two brains constantly interacting with each other with two different motivations, two different ambitions, two different desires, but one of them is dominant. And that is an absolute truth. I don't feel a need to even try to philosophically debate about that, right? And again, all this is relevant to transgender issues and Neil Degrasse Tyson. Neil deGrasse Tyson lived his life, went through school, put up with the BS, lived in a world of institutional racism and discrimination and prejudice, tried his best to navigate this world as we always do as African Americans, men, especially men, and just wanted to just do, I'm assuming he just wanted to just be a decent person, not be stereotypical Negro, and reach a point where he can provide for himself, right? So as the interviews go, because I don't know Neil deGrasse Tyson personally, but as the interviews goes, NASA deleted Pluto as a planet, demoted it as a planet. And who does everybody get mad at? Not Caucasians, not white people. They're not mad at NASA because NASA deleted Pluto. They're not upset at Caucasians in these academic firms because they said that Pluto is no longer a planet. They go after the person that they can see in front of them who works at the planetarium, which is his dream job, Neil deGrasse Tyson. Neil deGrasse Tyson, as a scientist, is able to, and this you can do the research on this, he's able to defend science through this process of information change. So the more people come to him as an expert and say, Pluto's a planet, I can't believe you killed Pluto, and by people I mean children, the more Neil deGrasse Tyson, as a adult man and a lover of science, is able to very calmly and very respectfully put these children in their place, because they're children and he's an adult, it's a different world, and the parents love it. They just think that it is the funniest thing ever. And so he becomes famous for this because influencers don't exist. The internet doesn't exist like that. Social media is not really a thing yet. But people come to the planetarium all the time to see Dr. Tyson and talk to Dr. Tyson, and they just get a kick out of him just telling these kids that Pluto is not a planet, get over yourself. And it's funny, right? It's a really funny when you look at it from a perspective of a culture and a society and a world. It's funny. Neil deGrasse Tyson becomes famous for this. There, all of the Lawrence Krauss and Brian Greens, they're already out there doing their thing. This is how a black man in America becomes famous in his field of expertise, right? So he becomes famous. So the media starts to recognize this person as part of the scientific community with a little bit more energy and a little bit more pizzazz than the average scientist. Because one thing about African Americans, and one of the reasons why it's hard for me to make my platform on my 2 cents, and another reason why I'm even speaking on this issue, is because we have been typecast as entertainers. The only thing that we can do as African Americans in America is be entertainers. If you look at the most successful African Americans in this world, 100% of us at the top are millionaires and billionaires. All of us are entertainers. There are no wealthy, aristocratic African Americans that are anything in any other field: doctors, lawyers, physicists, artists. There are no one that is African American and wealthy and publicly known are anything other than entertainers. All of them, right? So Neil deGrasse Tyson was like the first famous African American, and in the context of this, of the narrative that we're describing, the first famous, intelligent black man. He was the first black man to be well known and wasn't just an entertainer, but actually was an intelligent man. White communities was like, this is our guy. We need this guy. So they came to him like, we want you to be part of this science community thing and represent this within you. He's like, sure, I'll do that. But again, black people were always African. I prefer African American. Black people in general are constantly dealing with the adversities of this country. So Neil deGrasse Tyson is like, this is an opportunity for me to prove that black people can be more than just what society is typecasting us as. But he made the mistake of, I'm only going to be a scientist. I'm only going to be a scientist. I'm not going to be the black scientist. I'm not going to be the American scientist. I'm just going to be a science. If I can, same thing with Bill Nye, the science guy. If I can get rid of the bias in science, then I can bring science to the forefront, right? So that was his position. I don't know him personally. I'm just saying that this is what I think happened. So he starts becoming the black scientist. There are no black scientists. There are no intelligent African American men that represent America on TV or on a national playing field or in that entertainment space that's qualified. There's a difference between having an actor pretending to be a scientist and having a qualified scientist that is also entertaining. That was the key thing about Bill Nye the Science Guy that was relevant. Wasn't that he was a scientist, it was that he was entertaining. He could hold a person's attention. Holding the attention of a child was very difficult. We used to eat sugary cereals and run around all freaking day. We didn't want to be in the living room sitting in front of a TV. Asking a child of the 70s and the 80s to sit down and be still was like the hardest thing in the world to do. I'm digressing. This is what they wanted for Neil deGrasse Tyson. This is what the media wanted. They wanted to make him the black scientist and push him on the world. And the African American community already had the idea of a black freaking scientist. It was the perfect synergy. He didn't want to do that. He didn't want to be typecast in that role. And I respect that. I 100% respect that. I understand. The reason why my 2 cents is so freaking dry and struggling as a channel is because I don't want to be an entertainer. I don't want to be a tap dancing coon. I have no problem with being entertaining, but I don't want to have to be that first and my 2 cents second. Self-improvement through self-education is first. Me saying things that are profound and entertaining comes second, because I'm not going to sit down and write up a beautiful script that's going to hold your attention and not communicate anything to you, right? So I respect that position in Neil deGrasse Tyson. Now, he didn't want to do that. He didn't want to be a black scientist. He wanted to be a scientist. But we live in a society of institutional discrimination. His position of I don't want to be a black scientist became a position of there is no such thing as black and white. Black and white doesn't exist scientifically, so I'm not even going to waste my time with it as an empirical unit of measurement. But social science exists, and in the social sciences there is the bias of African American being black and Europeans being white. The bias is there. You can't do the scientific data without understanding that the bias is part of the control, right? That's how science works. So the more he pushed back against I don't want to be black, the more he stopped being famous as a scientist, right? Because if you want to just be an American scientist, we've got Brian Greene, we've got Bill Nye, we've got Lawrence Krauss, we've got all of these big name Caucasian scientists, because you're not white. You're just an American scientist. We've got a freaking country full of American scientists. We've only got one Neil deGrasse Tyson. And Neil deGrasse Tyson has to be the black scientist. Otherwise, you're just Neil. Otherwise, you're just Mr. Tyson. And we don't need you to be on TV next to Brian Greene being a dry-ass white American. We don't need that. We don't want that. That's what America was trying to get him to understand. He didn't want to understand that. He was trying to see the vision that he had. And you know what happened? He became what he wanted to be. Just the average American. Just a regular American. You can't brand being an American. Like, that's not how this country works. So, people accepted that Pluto was a planet. He was too big to work at the planetarium. Not big enough to do anything streamlined. He tried his hands at writing books and everything else. The only thing that was left for him to do was become an influencer. And how do you become an influencer if you can't be a black man at the same time? Well, he hired a comedian to do all his tap dancing. Instead of seceding, he doubled down, because that's just what men do. And when he doubled down hard. I'm going to continue to pursue this thing that I'm trying to do. I'm going to make this work. I'm just going to bring you on. I'm going to bring in this black comedian. I forget the guy's name. They call him Mr. Nice or Lord Nice or something like that. But I don't watch as much Star Talk as I probably should. But he brings him in to do what? To be the black guy. I don't want to. I am prestige. I am a scientist. I am elevated above all of that ratchetness. I need you to be my tap dancing coon. I need you to be the person that's going to stand in and represent African Americans without me having to do that, right? So he brings in Mr. Nice or Lord Nice or whatever title you want to use for the comedian, and they start talking and continue to do the things that they've always been doing. Now, transgender becomes an issue. Neil's like, transgender is a great platform to do science from. The problem is, transgender issue is a race issue. The transgender issue is an ethnicity issue. It is a class issue. It's classism and discrimination, racism and prejudice all rolled up into one beautiful, elegant schematic. But it hides itself as being progressive when it is very anti-woman. And that's the problem with the transgender movement. The way that you know the transgender movement is anti-women is because they don't want to define what men and women are as they try to explore beyond that, right? Imagine someone is trying to convince you that a number is not a number, and you're like, what is a trans number? If I say what is a trans number, the first thing you think is a letter. But if you don't even define what a number is, because isn't X trans number? X, we use X all the time for mathematical equations. Is it X or is it an unknown number? And if it's unknown, is it like, if you don't define it, is it really a number? So a trans number would literally be X. But you have to define what a number is, right? So Neil deGrasse Tyson understands that there are lots of undefined values in scientific information. So we don't have to even define what a woman is, because what is a circle? What is a square? What is a singularity? So being this prestigious scientist, he wants to do that. The problem is everything that is undefined in science is true in nature, right? I might not be able to give you a definition of a circle, but if I hold one up, you can identify it. Same thing with a woman. I might not be able to give you a clear idea, a clear definition of what it means to be a woman in here, but when you look at my face, you don't see a woman. And when you look at a woman, you see a woman. There is not women and men are so inherently different enough that you can show body parts to people and they will be able to identify them. You can take a picture of a thigh. Doesn't matter the ethnicity, doesn't matter the age. Hell, you can show somebody a thigh and they'll be able to tell you that's probably a 20-year-old woman, or that's probably a 40-year-old man. Even with seniors losing body mass, you can look at a 60 or 70-year-old man thigh versus a woman's thigh and be able to say, this is the thigh of a 70-year-old woman. This is the thigh of a 68-year-old man. Morphologically, one of the best examples of science when it comes to the idea of the transgender movement is this meme that said, Kelly identified as a woman, but when she died, her bones was identified as a man, right? The skeleton of a woman and the skeleton of a man are so naturally different that you can dig somebody up from 100,000 years ago and know what their gender was. If we get a fossil, we know the gender of the fossil, because gender is inherently part of the sexuality that is necessary for humans to be living creatures. One of the most important attributes of life itself is reproduction, to the point where they didn't even understand how to classify single cell organisms, so they defined them as asexual. Mother-daughter cells. I say it all the time. Mother-daughter cells. The mother gives birth to the daughter. Two cells that have no gender because they don't reproduce sexually. If they don't reproduce sexually, they can't have gender, right? I think that's a fair statement. But if we say that two partners are required for sexual reproduction, one of them provides DNA, the other carries and gives birth to the offspring, right? If we're saying that, then we have to define those two. And if we define those two, and it's always like that, even with plants, then we define them in their gender. The one that provides the DNA is the male. The one that carries and delivers the offspring is the female, right? Simple. A woman, by definition, is an adult age female. It's just that simple. What is a female? A female is the female is literally the gender that gives birth. Females give birth. Males impregnate females. Simple, right? The reason why Neil deGrasse Tyson is so adamant to be very unscientific when it comes to this issue is because it is his way of trying to go back to the issue of race indirectly, and it is very unscientific in his position. His position should be the same as it was with Pluto. That's why people were mad at him. Like, what are you doing? Where's that Pluto guy? What happened to the Pluto guy? You shot Pluto down. Like, we brought you on the air, and we couldn't wait to see you smash and demolish the transgender issue. But to be an African American in this country comes with a level of pain that nobody understands. And Neil deGrasse Tyson understands what it feels like to be told that you're something that you're not. He doesn't want people to tell him that he's a black scientist. He doesn't identify as a black scientist. He identifies as an American scientist. And I respect him for that. But it's unscientific not to be a scientist. And the most important part of science is the capacity to be honest and truthful. And when someone asks Neil deGrasse Tyson what a woman is, he should not have backpedaled because he doesn't want to be black, because that is the very definition of being black. You're supposed to hold the line as a man and do the things that are uncomfortable as a man. When a man and a woman are walking through the woods and a bear jumps out, you know what? There's an even better analogy. Star Wars. No one, go watch it yourself. But Return of the Jedi. No, Empire Strikes Back. When Han Solo was taking Princess Leia and Chewie and everybody to Cloud City, he's like, I know this guy. I think, I don't know where else to go. We can go here. And Leia's like, do you trust him? He was like, no, I don't trust him. Soon as, and this is like perfect storytelling, as soon as Lando Calrissian walked up on the ship, he's like, Han Solo, you son of a blah, 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 blah. I hate you. He's got guards with him. First thing Harrison Ford or Han Solo does is what? Go into a defensive stance to defend himself because he's ready for Lando to punch him in the face, right? The reason why this is so elegant is because racism or not, having an African American man be mad at a Caucasian without justification, without provocation, without any history behind it, not knowing anything going into their relationship, is just perfect American elegancy, right? You can, if you just seen two random dudes walk up on each other and they start screaming at each other, one was African American and one was Caucasian, you wouldn't question it, right? Like, they use that energy in the movie. Like, you wouldn't question it. You'd be like, yeah, that seems pretty normal. Like, so even though this is a science fiction, that energy transcends the screen and sets this elegant tone for the movie. Like, we don't know why Lando's mad at Han. We don't know why Han is defensive. We can clearly see that he's upset about, he feels guilty of something. Like, he's defending himself, but he's not like, you're wrong, you shouldn't this, you shouldn't that. He didn't argue or question or defend his position. He let Lando say what was Lando's truth, right? So the story continues and progresses. This is relevant. I promise it's relevant. The story continues and progresses. And we get to the point where Lando's like, yeah, I prepared a banquet for you guys. There's this great movie, number one, not movie. I prepared a banquet for you guys. We're going to have this great feast just in the hall. We just got to go over here. And I think he even mentioned that he brought a guest. And then the doors, and this goes back to what I was saying about when men or women are in the woods and a bear walks up on them. The door opens up. Chewie, Who is the warrior? Who is the epitome of I'm going to destroy you? Sees Darth Vader and screams. Lois, not Lois. Leia sees Darth Vader. She also screams. Chewie's scream was one of a war cry, but paralyzing fear. Leia's scream was one of a scared woman. Remember earlier in the series, Darth Vader tortured Leia. So she is seeing him. What does Han Solo do? The most elegant scene ever written in a movie, in my opinion. He immediately pulls out his blaster on Darth Vader, grabs Leia, Princess Leia, pushes her behind him, and starts shooting at Darth Vader. Like, the whole movie, nobody's thought to do that. Just shoot the guy, right? Like, pulls out his blaster, just starts shooting at Darth Vader. Darth Vader, being the imposing character that he's supposed to be, blocks the blaster fire with his hands, snatches Han Solo's weapon out of his across the room with the Force. The doors close behind them, and Lando leaves. And the thing that's so elegant about that scene is that it's like it sums up the whole conflict, right? Like, most stories have the reason why Darth Vader is the freaking emperor. I mean, the commander of the fleet and the most powerful person in the universe is because you can't even shoot him with a blaster. We've been watching people get shot with blasters since the very beginning of the show. We know that the Force is all powerful. We understand all of that stuff. We get it. When you watch a Jedi absorb blaster fire with their bare hands, which no one ever has done again, and that was the only time we've seen it, and the last time we've seen it, it really emphasizes on why they had lightsabers, you know? But that's just what men do. Men in general are predisposed to defending things with our lives. We have absolutely no problem with facing down danger at the sake of our own peril, with the understanding that we're gonna survive. And that's the thing about the human condition that doesn't translate well with all of the chaos, right? Men are willing to run into danger, believing that we're gonna come out the other side of that danger alive. We're probably the only animal that does that. Most animals probably fight each other to the death with fear of dying. Humans, or maybe I'm just crazy, we're the only things that, like, a fireman runs into a burning building understanding that he's gonna come out, right? Like, soldiers run into the battlefield understanding that they're not gonna die. And it's the weirdest aspect of the human condition, because we have enough information to know you're probably gonna die. This is probably gonna kill you. This is probably gonna be the last thing you do on this earth right now. But we continue to move forward. We continue to move toward those goals. And it's in that energy that Neil deGrasse Tyson is like, this is going to be my position. This is how I can fight racism. This is how I can fight discrimination. This is how I can fight prejudice without having to be the black man, right? And unfortunately, he's wrong. He's absolutely wrong. You cannot take the problem with the idea of the conflict that exists when it comes to the idea of institutional racism is that we are not black, we are not white, we are not European, we are not Asian, we are not African, we are human, we are all earthlings. Those other titles are values, right? Empirical data that define you in a lower context. We are infinitely, there are values about us that are infinite, right? I'm not just an earthling, I'm also orbiting Ra. I call the name for our sun, I use the Egyptian name Ra. I'm orbiting Ra because the sun doesn't have a name. What is the name of the sun? Sun. So I named it Ra. Well, the Egyptians named it Ra. I used Ra. The sun is the sun is the stellar body around which planets orbit. The planets orbit their sun, right? Every sun is a star. Every star that has planets orbiting it is a sun, right? Isn't that convoluted? Yes. I just call it Ra. So I'm orbiting Ra. So I am a living creature that evolved from. I'm a living creature that evolved around Ra. That's another level of variable that you can use. Like, and it just continues down from there. It just continues. So once we define our ethnicity and our nationality, those two values are what you use to get representation from your government. And what I mean is, if I'm hungry, and I get in my car and I drive to Canada and I say, "Hey, I'm hungry," and Canada's like, "Okay, who are you?" I'm Paul Emerson. Where were you born? I was born in America. What is your What is your ethnicity? My ethnicity is African American. What province of Canada were you born in? I wasn't born in the province of Canada. I was born in America. Why are you here asking us for resources if you're an American? You get it? That's how that works. If I drive to Mexico and I'm like saying the same thing, I'm like, why are you in Mexico? You have your own government. Go to your government. If your nationality is American, you're an American. Go ask Americans for resources, right? And it shouldn't be that way, but it's that way because we haven't lived in an age of abundance for very long. Like, the capacity by which we were able to generate resources has grown and evolved over time. There was a time when, and again, I've already addressed this, but I want to put it in the context of this statement with Neil Degrasse Tyson for like a closing argument for what I believe is the issue with the transgender movement. There wasn't always enough resources to go around, right? The kings and the queens, they would, because all this is the class, everything about, in the 42 years that I've been alive, doing the math, doing the science, doing the observation, running the experiments, living in the experiment, the issue of racism boils down to classism, and classism used to define economics. We don't need classism and we don't need economics, right? We don't need freaking money. We don't need to, because why do I need money for food? Is there a single person on this planet that doesn't eat food? No. So why do I need money for it? Do I need money for food, or do I need somebody to regulate food so that there's enough for me to have access to it when I need it? Those are two different dynamics. And that's the conflict with the world. We went from having one farmer barely able to feed 100 people to having one farmer feeding hundreds of millions of people, right? Our farms are becoming more and more automated. You need less and less farmers, and we're producing more and more crops. The crops get cheaper to produce per yield, but the people the people that, okay, if I was a farmer and I grew 100 yield grains of corn, and that 100 grains of corn was enough money for me to survive for a year, right? The next year I grow 200 grains of corn. That's enough corn for me to provide for me for 2 years. And then the next year I grow 3 grains of corn, and it's enough corn for me to be able to survive for a year because of inflation. So I'm sitting here like, I'm doing 3 times the amount of work and I'm making 1/3 the income. How and why? It didn't get easier. It still takes the same amount of labor, but for some reason the value of it has just diminished. So now you need me to grow 9 times the amount of corn to go back to living at 3 times my income level because I got comfortable with the extra money. Fine. I'll go grow 9 times the amount of corn for you. Now I'm growing 9 times the amount of corn, and you're like, yeah, that's 1 year's worth of income. How? It should be 9 times the income. It used to be 9 times the amount of money. Now it's still an annual income, but I'm doing 9 times the labor. It's not getting easier, it's getting harder. Well, it is easier. There was a time when you could only grow 100 years of corn. Now you can grow 900 years of corn. But it's only easier if the economics reflect that. I'm doing more work. I'm putting more force over distance through time. Even if there is some type of efficiency level, I could do the same way. I can grow 9 times the amount of corn that I use, 900 units of corn. Do you know how easy it would be to just grow like 9 units of corn opposed to 900? If I could grow 9 units of corn, and then that would be worth one annual year's income, that would be easier. That's not what's happening, right? That's the conflict. All of that is based on racism and institutional racism and governance, right? Because the farmer in Europe, in Africa too, but specifically in Europe, they were in the fields growing the corn, and the king was sending out his knights to take the corn as tax. And the king would tax the corn, take the corn back to the castle, and use that food as a bartering leverage to continue to control the people. Because the people would come to the king hungry with concerns and grievances, and the king would either give them gold or food. If gold wouldn't work, he would give them food. And that's how he was able to maintain law and order. The farmer was the one that was doing all the labor. So the farmer is the one that should have been the king. Every farm should be a lord because they have the goods that could be exchanged amongst each other that would trickle down to everyone else. The problem is that the farmer is too busy growing crops and not able to provide an army for himself. And if he has a standing army to protect his crops, then guess what he's doing with all his extra food? He's feeding his standing army. So since the king was able to organize that better and collect taxes and everything else and got a structure put in place, they became lords over the land. And then the farmers had to give a certain amount of resources of their crops to the king, and the king will provide them for protection. So now the farmer has the freedom to not have to worry about guarding and protecting his crops from thieves and everything else. This is the foundation of how society grew and evolved for all ethnicities and nationalities on the planet. Different groups on different parts of different geographical regions of the earth had different adversities and different struggles to overcome, but it was always basically the same. When it came to the African continent and in what we consider Egypt, they were able to do it in a way that was super simple for them. Very naturally, very simple. And that gave them thousands of years of prosperity. Since the king was sitting in a castle, protected by guards, being served all the time, he got light skinned and fat. The average person during his time had to labor really hard to be able to survive on a day-to-day basis. If you wanted to just live, you could just do that. It wasn't hard to just live. If you wanted prosperity, if you wanted prestige, if you wanted a higher quality of life than just living, you had to work hard for it. Working hard meant you were outside under the sun, and if you tanned, you were darker, right? If a woman came to your house and she had light skin, clean skin, well-kept hair, clothing that were not dirty and dingy, you knew she was noble because of her position, because she was clean, because her skin was smooth, because she didn't have sores, because her hands weren't calloused. So they identified the upper class as white because they weren't laboring. They wasn't doing any labor, so they had more food, better health, um, fairer skin because they weren't exposed to sun. They were weaker and more feeble. They considered them to be noble because of that. You could just look at the person that had spent 20 years of their life being coddled and know this person is a nobleman because they don't look like they worked a day in their life. The average person, on the other hand, were tan. They weren't brown skin. They were tan. They were dirty. They were wearing rags because their clothes were always getting ripped and torn up because they were laboring. And they identified that with being lower class. But being lower class meant that you were doing all the work. You were responsible for generating the wealth in the world, right? So that's how classism came into being. You can just look at somebody and know exactly what tier of the ladder they were on, how much wealth they had, how much money they had, how much prestige they would have based on classism. That was how they classified it, right? Then they went to the Africans and they were like, okay, that completely destroys our classism system because the guy that's sitting on a throne is in good health. His skin is amazing, but it's dark. That doesn't make any sense. And when we go out into the actual fields where they're working in the farms, they're in even better health. They're even healthier than the guy sitting on the throne because they don't suffer the negative effects of continuous exposure to sunlight like we do. They just get darker. So being dark is synonymous with if fair skin is the most important quality of being noble, and being dark implies fair skin for Africans, then the farmer is the fairest person of them all. The farmer is the healthiest person when you're an African because you're physically strong, physically more powerful, you're more capable. Your skin is great because the sun darkens you. As you get darker, as you spend more time in the sun, your skin gets darker. As your skin gets darker, it becomes healthier. I know that people say that you need to wear suntan, you need to wear sunscreen and all this stuff, but no. If you put sunscreen on your skin, the sunscreen's gonna damage your skin. That's how that shit works. It's not that your skin is being damaged by the sun. You're putting a chemical in your body, and that chemical is reacting with your body. And your body is reacting to that chemical, and you perceive that as damage from the sun. But that is not how it works. That is not how it works. When I was in the army, the sun would hit my scalp and it would blister from all of the heat, but that's not the same as what you would see when it came to Europeans. Because as soon as the scab is gone, just like any other callus you get on your hand, your skin gets stronger. But if you cover it with sunscreen, that interferes with the body's natural ability to heal. Because if you go to different parts of the world, there's different frequencies and different vibrations of sunlight, and your body is going to be in tune to the very specific region that you're in, and you're not going to have a problem with the sun. But there's going to come times when you're going to go certain places and you are going to have issues with the sun because it's just natural and normal. But you will heal and evolve beyond it if you have high melanin, not if you have lower melanin. Right? That's classism in a nutshell. Somebody decided one day in Europe that they would just rule the world. And they went to the church and the church funded it. That's why I'm not a Christian. How do you let the king come to you and ask you to fund their war, and you say, I will fund your war if you spread the word of God? Like, how do you justify that? How do you justify that? Imagine a gangster. You know what? Since everybody's all doing this trend with Puff Daddy, imagine Puff Daddy came to the Vatican, went to the Vatican right now, and was like, Vatican, I wanna take over the world, and I can't afford to do it. Can you fund my war to take over the world? And the Vatican looks at Puff Daddy and is like, yeah, I'll fund your war to take over the world. You have to recognize the church, and you have to spread the world. You have to spread the word of God as you travel. And I will bless and fund your war. Because that's literally what happened in the past. Everybody that speaks English because the Christian church used the money they got from the people. Remember, the government was taxing people. And while the government was taxing people, people were willingly going to church and paying tithes to the church so they could go to heaven. So they put their two monies together. I said monies. They put their collective money together and used that to fund the expedition to America and to fund the expedition into Asia and everywhere else in the world. Their global conquest was funded by Christianity. That's why everywhere that speaks English is also Christian. And when they went into the Muslim regions where the Islams are, there was already cultures there, and those cultures fought back against the the invading forces. And this is the part that people don't understand. The invading forces were coming with the Bible. It wasn't. It wasn't. There was fighting, and Christianity was there. It was, we need you to adopt Christianity. We're going to kill you and force you to become Christian. That's what was happening. That's what the crusade was. The crusade wasn't, we're going into these regions of the world and we're engaging in, and we're encountering hostilities from the locals. It's like we're invading these regions of the world and the locals are defending themselves. And every time we conquer one of them, we force them to be Christian. And they did that forever. Because you either was fighting somebody and forcing them to be Christian, or you were negotiating peace with someone and giving them Christianity. And how do you go somewhere, start a freaking war, and then engage in peace talks with them and be like, have you heard about our Lord and Savior? Like, really think about that. Somebody starts attacking you. You come home from work, getting attacked, getting rocks thrown at you and stuff, and every day is a struggle and a battle and a fight, and you're constantly having to have all these extra tactics on how you're going to get home and be safe. And then one day, the person that started attacking you first is like, we should have peace. Like, we had peace before you attacked me. What are you talking about? I just want to let you know that I don't really want to fight you anymore. Here's a Bible. Can we learn about can I teach you about my Lord and Savior Jesus Christ? You're like, what is this? This doesn't make any sense. You were attacking me. Now you want to form a peace treaty with me because you're the aggressor. And then after we form this peace treaty, you're going to convert me from not having a religion to your religion. And the main character of your religion is a man that looks like you. Make that make sense. But right now I'm ranting and raving. Um, I said what I needed to say. I will do more. I'll try to do a better job of structuring my videos better. But yeah, I wanted to just get beyond that. As always, my name's Paul. I'm sitting there. I was giving you my 2 cents.